Okay, so hello and welcome back to another Unity multiplayer tutorial. Today we'll be taking a mirror multiplayer game and combining it with PlayFab to add persistent data storage. This allows us to store data that isn't lost when the game server stops running, so you could store the player's username, how many wins they've got at your particular game, or whatever data you want to keep saved. And by using PlayFab, it's much easier than setting up your own database and managing all of that yourself. It's all done for you, so hope you're looking forward to it. Let's get started. But just before we get into it, I'd like to mention that only 22% of the people who are watching are actually subscribed to the channel. So if you want a quick and easy way to help support the channel for free, head down below, hit the subscribe button, and enjoy the video. So here we are inside of Unity, and if you want access to the project, then as always, you can get a link to the GitHub down below. And all the setup we have here is a mirror example project. So when you import mirror, we have mirror, examples, Pong, and then go into the scene, we have this Pong scene. And I've got it set up in my build settings, so when I build, we build out this scene. And then in scripts, I have a script from last time, where when we start, we connect to PlayFab, and that's all we do. We just sign in with an ID. If someone else knows my ID, then they can connect to my account. It's not very secure for now, but for now it will do. We'll do a separate tutorial on authentication with emails and passwords. So all we want to do in this tutorial is make it so that when I score a point as a player by hitting the ball to the back of the other player's side, I want to increase my score, and that's easy to do anyway. But rather than just keeping the score internal, and then when I shut down the game it's lost, I want to store my score online on PlayFab. And I want to just keep incrementing my wins over time, so that when I go up against new opponents and we connect to each other, the server will actually display each player's wins, just so you can see some persistent data being stored. So to do that, if we go to the example, so mirror examples Pong, inside of prefabs we have the racket, and we can look in the hierarchy here. I've added as a child a canvas. So we see here I've got a canvas, which is a world space canvas of width 2 and height 4, which matches the, as you see here, the racket itself. And then the text on it is just simply a Text Mesh Pro text element, and it's very, very small because it's a very, very small object. And this 0, if I up it to 100, it will look like this. The mirror icon gizmo is in the way, but there you go. So we can display on the paddle, on the racket, how many points that person has. Okay, so I think we should start getting into the code now, because we can head over to the scripts, and the problem is we need this PlayFab login. We need to actually have code in here that interacts with the Pong example, and they're in different parts of the project, so I need to go move this over there. So if we look here in the project, I can go drag this script into Pong scripts. That's the first thing to do. So we have all these 4 scripts here, and it's now saying that we're missing PlayFab. And that's because if you go back up to the mirror examples, we have this assembly definition, which has some imports here saying we can use from the mirror assembly definition and mirror components. We also want to add here PlayFab, and we want to add Text Mesh Pro because we will be using that. So Text Mesh Pro. And when you click off it and hit apply, it will do what it needs to do. And now the error goes away. Let's now go into Pong, scripts, and we're first of all going to go into the PlayFab login script. So right now when we log in, we don't do anything special. We just log in and then debug log to the console saying that it worked. But we actually want to store some data because when we log in this result we get back, we actually get a token. It's called a session ticket for PlayFab. And with this, we can give it to the server, and then the server can validate it saying, yes, you are that player and here are your wins. So we can't trust the client. We can't have the client just say, I have this many wins, or we can't trust the client saying, this is my player ID, because if you knew someone else's player ID, then you could just pretend to be someone else. So we need to use this session ticket. So result.session ticket. And we need to send this to the mirror server. So we need to store it for later. What we can do is we can make a public static string called session ticket. And all we need to do is set it equal here. And I'll move these around. So once we successfully log in, we store our session ticket. And that's all we need for this script. So currently we use the PlayFab client API to do the logging in for the client, but the server itself also needs to do certain actions with the API. So if we go back into Unity and go over to our PlayFab editor extension, you'll see on settings, if we go over to API, I've enabled the server API, and you need to make sure you've done the same, because if you don't do this, then we can't use the server API related methods to update the player's data and to get it. So make sure that's enabled, and then we can go back into our code. We want to add one more thing into the PlayFab login script, and that is a way to make this custom ID change so that we can have a player 1 and a player 2, rather than having them both be the same person. So we go up to the top, let's make a serialized field, private string, and we'll just call this the custom ID. And then if we simply put that in here, there we go. Now we can jump over to the player script, and the player is on the racket itself. So we want to have reference to the text element so that we can update it with their wins. So serialized field, private, tmp underscore text, and we'll call this the score text. Import text mesh pro. And then we also want to have a sync var so that we can sync the player's score, because the server will set that variable and then the clients will receive it. We can't trust the clients to change it themselves. So make a sync var with a hook method, and this will be to update the UI. So we'll make this name of handle score updated, and then the actual variable will be private int score. And it doesn't actually need to be serialized field private, so it can just stay private. And then we also want to store the PlayFab ID for this player, and this is what we'll use to actually grab their wins. So private string PlayFab ID. I'll also move the public variables that were already in here up to the top. So we're left with this now. So as soon as the player spawns in, we want the actual client themselves to tell the server what their session ticket is so that the server can then validate it. So what we can do here is we can say override on start authority. So when this starts running for the person who owns it, we then want to do a CMD. We want to do a command to the server. So command, and we can just call this private void cmd set session ticket, and we'll pass through the string session ticket. So over here we can just say cmd set session ticket playfab login dot session ticket, the static variable we made previously. So we're telling the server, hello, I've connected and this is my session ticket. So now for the server to actually validate this, we can use playfab server API, import playfab, and we can use a method called authenticate session ticket, which takes in this class here, which is in a namespace that I'm going to import now. So import playfab.serverModels. Spread this all out. So the first parameter here, we want to pass in a session ticket, the session ticket we want to authenticate. So that equals session ticket. And then we have two more variables here, and these are callbacks. So the first one is the result, like so. And the second one is what happens when there is an error. So when there's an error, we can just debug log it. So debug.log error, error.generate error port, which is the human readable string for the error. And then the result is, well, that means we've successfully authenticated this user. So we want to store their playfab ID. So playfab ID equals result.userinfo.playfab ID. We then want to go get their score from playfab. So we'll make a method called getScore. And then down here we can make private void getScore. And let's make sure only the server can run this. So to go grab the score for this player, we need to use the playfab server API.get user data. And we have to pass through the model that it wants, which is a get user data request. We're using IntelliSense a lot here to help us speed this up. And it's the same thing here. First of all, we want to fill in their playfab ID. That's how we know which user to get. So playfab ID equals playfab ID. And then we have, just like before, the result. So comma result, comma error. When there's an error, we'll do the same thing. We'll just log it out. When there is a result, we want to then check that data, because if they have no wins so far, if they have no score, then it's going to be empty. So when you say if result.data does not equal null, So if there is some data being passed back, and result.data, which is a dictionary, contains key score. And just to explain how this works or how this looks, let's quickly go to PlayFab's website. So we go out, go to PlayFab, go to players, we can look at our player, we can go to player data title, so player data for this title, and you see it's actually like a dictionary, it's a key value pair. So you can have wins, and you can have 5 wins, and you can save that. But we want to do it in code. So let's remove this now, remove save player data. But the point is you get a key value pair. So when we do this request, we get back data, which is a dictionary, and we're saying if it contains a key for score, then we want to say score equals, and we need to convert it to an integer, so int.parse, the result.data, and then the way you access a dictionary is like this with square brackets, score, and then the value, which is the actual value of it. So this will say, if they have score, then go grab that value, which may be 5. So this would be 5 as a string, and then we convert it to an integer. Now, yes, this is technically error prone. If the thing we get back is not parsable to an int, then we'll get an error. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'll be keeping it simple. And then when we set the score, because score is a sync var, it will then make all the clients update their UI. We just need to actually write the method to do that. So handle score updated. Let's go down, make a private void, handle score updated, take in an int old score and an int new score. And we can just update the score UI. Score text equals new score .toString. And finally, we need a way to actually increase the player's score. So let's make a public method called increment score. And what it will do is it will increment the score, but then we need to update it on PlayFab. So we can say PlayFab server API .update user data, passing in the object it needs, using IntelliSense to fill it in quickly. And just like the other requests, we need to pass some things in. So we need to pass in the PlayFab ID for this player, which we already have. And we need to pass in a dictionary of data to update. So we can say here, a new dictionary, which yet again has a very long namespace. So let's import, let's import system collections generic. And then we want to, for this dictionary, have an entry where a key is score, comma, and the value is score.toString. Because it needs to be stored as strings, so we take our integer score and convert it to a string. And then with this, we also need, just like the others, a result, what happens when it's successful, and an error, what happens when it's unsuccessful. For the error, we can just log it. And for the result, we don't really need to do anything. We can just log it as well. We could say debug.log updated score. Let's also make sure that we don't call this on the client by accident, so we'll put server there. And all we need now is to actually call this method to increment the score, and this is whenever the ball hits either of the two side walls. So let's go to the ball script, and whenever we collide with something on collision into 2D, I think what we should do is we should say if collider.gameObject.name, and normally I would never do this by name, but the focus here is on the multiplayer and PlayFab side of things, not the actual way we check if the player's getting points or not, because this will work, though it's very simple and very easy to break, because I'm just going to check the name of the wall. So if the wall is called wall left, then I'm going to do this, and if it's called wall right, then I'm going to go do this instead. So I need to get reference to a player object and call this increment score method. So if we hit the left wall, then let's grab player, so gameObject.find, which I also would not use normally, but gameObject.find, it's easy for this. Racket, and we'll call it racket1. Grab the player component, and we'll call player.increment score. And then whenever the ball does that, we'll also reset it. So we'll put it into the middle, transform.position equals 3.0. And we'll change the rigid body's velocity to be just like it is at the start, which is this line here. And then we'll return. So whenever the ball hits the left wall, we find the player on the right, increment their score, put the ball back in the middle, and reset the velocity. And when it hits the right wall, we want to find player bracket 0 and do the same thing. Now we just need to make sure we actually name the players correctly. So if we go to the final script, Network Manager, here's where it spawns in a player. And what we want to do here is say player.name equals bracket, and then inside of brackets, num players. So when you connect, if you're the first player, you're bracket 0, and when you connect and you're the second player, you're bracket 1. Now I think it's time for us to start testing. So if we go back into Unity, let's make sure if we go to the examples for Pong, the prefab, make sure the racket has the reference to the score text. So we'll drag in the score text. And then we've got the playfab login script. Let's call the player 1. So we're going to build, that client will be player 1. And then we'll run it in the editor and that player will be player 2. So what we can do here is we can file, build, and run. So here we have a build, and this is player ID 1. So if we go to the editor and increment this to 2, and then run it in the editor, we'll log in as player 2. And now I can host here, for example, and I have a score of 0. If I go over here as well, I have a score of 0 as well. And we can play the game. And let's say I score a point. I then gain a point. I can try and score, let's say, 3 points. So we'll do it again and again. So I'm on 3 points. And for the other player, well, I'm on 4 points now. So for the other player, I'll try and score some points. So I'll get, let's say, 3 points. And then we'll stop the game. Okay, so I've got 3 points now. Now watch what happens if I hit host again. It actually goes to 0 because that's what the text defaults to. But when it's loaded, it updates it to 3. And if I go over to the build and connect again, it actually remembers that I'm on 4 points. And I can then play again and get 5, get 6, get 7 points. We can stop the game and then we can start again if you like, and it will load them back up. And it's grabbing all this data from playfab. So if I was to stop everything again, head over to playfab and go to players, you'll now see we have 3 players, the getting started and then the 2 we've just made. So you see the 2 that logged in at the same time. We'll open those both up. You can see this is player 2 and this is player 1. And their player data, if we open both those up, score 8 and score 3. And if I was to say, actually my score is 200 and save this, and then go back and play, you actually see, it's very hard to see, but it has loaded up to a score of 200. So you can definitely see how it works, how it saves, and how it loads. And now we have some persistent data. And hopefully you can see how easy it is to just come up with a new key. And if you want to, let's say in the player, if you wanted to update 2 things, you could just go like this, comma, and have some other data and some other value. And then there you go. If you wanted to do that, you can update multiple values at once. So yeah, we now have persistent data. And just in case you're having issues with this, one thing to look at is make sure on your playfab editor extension that you are signed into your playfab account and that your settings, your project setup, remember not to share your developer secret key. I'm going to be changing this after the tutorial. And also to be safe, if you're working just for testing purposes, it's completely fine, don't worry. But if you're actually releasing your game and you were to build right now, you'll be actually giving your clients your secret key, which you don't want to be doing. So I'd recommend removing the secret key when you build for clients, give them their build, and then when you're building a server build, keep the developer secret in, otherwise the API calls won't work. So yeah, there's a bit more on that I can cover in future tutorials about actually releasing a game, but purely for building and testing, it's completely fine to leave that in. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, then please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know down below what you want to see next. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. But of course, before I go, I've got to thank my patrons. A special thanks to Francisco Lira, Liz Kimber, Andrew Williams, Beardodai, Benjamin Hilda, Chris Diplock, Colin Lester, David McDermott, Farouk, Jake Nixon, Joris Letter, Katinka Mom, Matt Fryer, Mike Troop, Sam Marcus, Malvin, and Rack. If anyone else would like to help support the channel monetarily, link to my Patreon is down below. If not, there are also links down below to other social media such as Twitch, Twitter, and Discord. If you could help us out by following on any of those or checking any of those out, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.